I was rinsing the last of the dinner plates when the phone rang. The sound startled me. It was late, the kind of quiet evening when the only noise should have been the hum of the refrigerator and the faint crackle of the autumn wind brushing against my windows. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something, maybe that little instinct all mothers carry, made me wipe my hands on the dish towel and pick up. "Mom?" The voice on the other end froze me in place. I gripped the counter just to steady myself. It had been 18 years since I'd heard that voice call me Mom, without anger or accusation laced in it. 18 years of silence. "Rachel," I whispered, her name breaking in my throat like glass. "Yeah, it's me." She laughed nervously, the same laugh she had when she was a little girl and tried to cover up breaking a vase. "Listen, Thanksgiving's coming up. Dad and I were talking. We'd love for you to come over. You know, just family time." Family time. The words were sweet poison. I glanced at the photo hanging near my fridge, a sun-faded picture of Rachel when she was 12, her arms around her father's neck, her smile wide and certain. That was before she decided to live with him full-time, before she slammed the door on me as if I was a stranger, before 18 long years of unanswered letters, birthdays spent in silence, Christmas mornings alone. My heart beat hard against my ribs. I wanted to shout, "Now you remember I'm your mother?" after nearly 2 decades. But instead, I swallowed the bitterness and asked, "Why now, Rachel? Why invite me now?" There was a pause on the line, the kind where you can hear the truth forming but not quite ready to be spoken. Then she said, "Well, I saw the article about your restaurants, about how successful you've become. Congratulations, Mom. That's amazing." There it was, the dagger dressed as a compliment. My restaurants, my blood and sweat poured into that little diner that grew into 3, then 6, then a chain of 15 across Nebraska and Iowa. It had been front-page news last month. Local woman builds culinary empire. Suddenly, after years of silence, my daughter wanted family time. "You didn't think of family time when I was scraping rent together, or when I spent Christmas Eve waiting for a call that never came," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mom, please," Rachel said quickly, her voice shifting to that coaxing tone I remembered all too well. "I know it's been a long time, but people grow, they change. I've got 2 little ones now, your grandchildren. Don't you want to meet them? Don't you think it's time?" Grandchildren. My knees almost buckled. For 18 years, she'd kept them from me. No photos, no phone calls, not even a mention. And now, suddenly, she was dangling them in front of me like bait. I walked to the window. Outside, the maple trees were shedding their last leaves, red and gold scattered across the lawn like confetti after a party no one had invited me to. "It's been a long time, Rachel," I said softly. "I know, and I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, whether from guilt or performance, I couldn't tell. "But please, just come for Thanksgiving. Dad will be there. The kids will be excited. We can start fresh." Start fresh? My stomach twisted. I thought of all those years working double shifts at the diner, saving every penny while she celebrated birthdays with her father and his new wife, posting photos of ski trips and beach vacations. I thought of the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if she even remembered the sound of my voice. And now? Now that the newspapers had called me the woman who beat the odds, suddenly I was worth inviting back. "All right," I said finally after a silence that seemed to stretch across the years. "I'll be there." Her relief spilled through the line. "Really? Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. Thanksgiving Day, around 4. I'll text you the address. We moved into a new house last year. You'll love it. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. I almost believed them, almost let myself picture walking into a warm house, being hugged by my daughter, kissed by my grandchildren, welcomed like family. But deep down, a voice whispered, "This isn't about love. This is about money." "Rachel," I said before she could hang up, "I'll come. But I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" Her voice brightened instantly, and though she didn't say the word, I could hear it in her tone. "Money." "Yes," I said, "something you'll never forget." I hung up before she could press further. The silence returned to my kitchen, thicker than before, but not empty. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the yard, the world preparing for winter. And I stood there for a long time, staring at the photo of the daughter I used to know, the one who once clung to me when storms frightened her at night. It had been 18 years. Some wounds scabbed over with time, others stayed raw, waiting for the right moment to open again. Maybe this Thanksgiving would be that moment? The night Rachel left me is carved into my memory as sharply as a knife against glass. I can still see the shadows stretching long across the living room floor, the way the light from the kitchen barely touched the photographs on the wall. I was standing by the doorway, clutching a worn dish towel in my hand, when she told me her decision. "I'm moving in with Dad." Her words hit harder than any slap could have. She was 15 then, all teenage stubbornness and that mix of innocence and arrogance that makes kids believe they know everything. "Rachel, sweetheart, we can work this out," I had begged, my throat burning with unshed tears. "I may not have as much money as your father, but I can give you stability, love, a real home." Her eyes had been cold, distant, so much older than her years. "A home? Mom, look around." She gestured to the small rented house, the peeling paint on the window frame, the second-hand sofa sagging in the middle. "Dad's house is bigger. I'll have my own room. I won't have to work weekends to help cover bills. With him, I'll actually have a chance." And then she twisted the knife deeper. "Maybe if you had tried harder, maybe if you weren't such a failure, things would be different." I still remember the sting of those words, sharper than any insult I'd ever endured. They weren't just her words, they were his. The poison her father, Martin, had been dripping into her ear for months, maybe years. Martin, the man I once loved, the man who vowed to protect me for better or worse, but decided worse was too inconvenient. He had traded me for a younger woman with polished nails and a bank account twice the size of ours. He didn't just leave me with bills and a broken heart. He took Rachel too. I had caught glimpses of it before. The late nights at the office, the perfume that wasn't mine on his shirts, the hollow excuses that crumbled the second you touched them. But the night he finally told me he was leaving, it was like the walls of our life collapsed all at once. "You're holding me back, Laura," he'd said, his suitcase by the door, his eyes colder than Nebraska winter. "I can't keep living like this. You'll never be more than a waitress with dreams too big for your hands." I can still hear the sound of that suitcase rolling across the hardwood floor as Rachel stood beside him, her arms crossed, her face set. She didn't even look back. That was the start of my silence. Birthdays came and went. I mailed cards that were returned unopened. I left voicemails that went unanswered. When she graduated, I sat in the back of the auditorium alone, hidden in the crowd, just to see her walk across the stage. She never knew I was there. The loneliness settled into me like frost creeping across a window. Some nights, I would set the table for two out of habit, then quietly put the second plate back in the cabinet. Christmas mornings, I would sit with a cup of coffee, watching the snow fall, pretending that somewhere Rachel was thinking of me too. But deep down, I knew better. There were moments when the pain turned into anger. I would look at the empty chair across from me and whisper, "How could you?" As if the walls could answer. I blamed Martin for poisoning her against me, for making my daughter see me as weak. I blamed Rachel for believing him so easily, for never once asking if I was okay. But anger is a heavy coat to wear. Eventually, it weighs you down until you can't move. So I learned to take it off, at least during the day. I went to work. I smiled at customers. I chopped onions until my eyes burned from more than just the sting. And then at night, when the house was too quiet, I let the grief wash over me like a tide I couldn't stop. It wasn't all darkness, though. Life has a way of handing you small mercies in the middle of storms. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, would sometimes leave a casserole by my door. A retired teacher who lived alone, she told me once, "We women, we survive what we must." Those words stuck with me, but survival doesn't erase the ache of being abandoned by your own child. That wound never closed. It just scabbed over, waiting. So when Rachel called me after all those years, when she said the word mom, like it still belonged to me, all those memories came flooding back. The slammed doors, the cold eyes, the silence that stretched for nearly 2 decades. And I couldn't help but wonder, did she truly want me back in her life? Or did she only want what she thought my success could give her? As I stood at my window that night, watching the first snow of November drift down, I realized something. I wasn't the same woman she'd walked away from. I wasn't the waitress scraping tips to pay rent. I had built something from the ashes. I had found strength where there had once been nothing but despair. But still, deep in the quietest corner of my heart, there was a flicker of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, my daughter had remembered the mother who once held her through thunderstorms, who packed her lunches with little notes inside, who loved her even when love wasn't enough. And that hope was what scared me most. When Martin walked out and Rachel followed him, I thought my life was over. For weeks, I barely left my bed except to drag myself to the diner where I worked the morning shift. The rhythm of pouring coffee and wiping counters was the only thing that kept me upright. Customers came and went, most of them too wrapped up in their own lives to notice the woman behind the counter was breaking piece by piece. But something happened in that small diner. Somewhere between the hiss of the griddle and the clatter of dishes, I found a strange kind of clarity. Cooking had always been my quiet passion. Long before Martin grew restless, I used to experiment with recipes late into the night. Meatloaf with a twist of rosemary, biscuits that melted on the tongue, pies that made neighbors show up uninvited. Food was the one language I spoke fluently, the one thing that never betrayed me. One night, after a double shift, I stayed behind in the empty kitchen. I baked a pie, apple, cinnamon heavy, the way Rachel liked it when she was little. I sat at the counter alone, staring at it. I couldn't bring myself to eat a single slice. Instead, I boxed it up and wrote on the lid in shaky handwriting, "Free for whoever needs it." I left it on the doorstep of the shelter 2 blocks away. The next morning, when I walked past, a young mother was sitting on the steps with her child, sharing that pie like it was the first good thing they'd had in weeks. And something inside me shifted. That was the spark. With the little money I had, I rented a stall at the Saturday farmers market. I sold homemade pies, biscuits, and casseroles. I woke up at 3 in the morning to knead dough, my hands cracked and raw from flour and soap. But the smiles of people who came back week after week made it worth it. "Laura, you ought to open a real place," one woman told me as she bought her third peach cobbler in a row. At first, I laughed it off. I didn't have savings, connections, or even confidence. But the seed had been planted. I scraped together every tip, every overtime shift, and borrowed just enough to lease a tiny corner cafe on Main Street. It had mismatched chairs, secondhand tables, and an oven that gave out if you looked at it wrong. But it was mine. The first weeks were brutal. I cooked, cleaned, and balanced the books alone. Some nights I slept in a booth, too exhausted to drive home. But people came. At first out of curiosity, then out of loyalty. Truck drivers, teachers, churchgoers. They all wanted the comfort of food made with care. Word spread. By the end of the first year, Laura's Kitchen wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Local papers ran small features. Single mom turns heartbreak into home cooking. That headline made me cry, because Rachel hadn't spoken to me in years. They didn't know the full story. Expansion didn't happen overnight. It took a decade of grit. I learned to read contracts, negotiate leases, hire and fire. I burnt casseroles, lost money on a bad supplier, and cried in my office when bills stacked higher than the orders. But I never quit. When the Great Recession hit, other restaurants folded. I cut my menu in half, focused on what sold, and turned the cafe into a safe haven. I let people pay what they could. Some gave quarters, others nothing at all. But the goodwill it built came back tenfold. By 2015, I owned 6 restaurants. By 2020, 15. People called me a culinary success story. What they didn't see were the scars on my hands from hot pans, the sleepless nights, the loneliness that clung like a shadow. I stayed in the same small house, drove the same beat-up Ford, wore jeans that had seen better days. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted no one, especially Martin or Rachel, to think my worth was measured by luxury. I wanted my worth to be in the life I built with nothing but grit. And yet, in the quiet moments, I would still catch myself wondering if Rachel ever walked past one of my restaurants, if she recognized my name on the sign. Did she know her mother had built something real? Did she care? When the local newspaper put me on the front page, "Local Woman Builds Culinary Empire," I thought maybe she'd finally notice. I clipped the article and tucked it in a drawer, unsure if it was pride or pain that made my hands shake. I had turned ashes into something living. But even as the applause of the community grew louder, a part of me longed for one voice, the one that had been silent for 18 years. And then, just weeks later, the phone rang. Rachel's voice on the other end, soft and hesitant, calling me Mom again. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was currency. She didn't want me. She wanted what she thought I had. Still, as I stood in the glow of my kitchen light, surrounded by the smell of yeast and sugar, I felt something unfamiliar, a sense of power. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the woman she had abandoned. I wasn't the one begging to be chosen. I was the one who had survived. And this time, it would be her turn to face what that meant. A week after Rachel's invitation, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't her voice that answered when I picked up. "Laura." That deep baritone still carried a smug undertone, even after all these years. Martin, the man who had walked out with a suitcase and never looked back. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Well, well," I said evenly. "It's been a long time." He chuckled, That same hollow laugh I remembered from nights he thought his lies were clever enough to cover the scent of another woman's perfume. Don't be like that. We're family, after all. Family. The word felt sour. I hear Rachel invited you for Thanksgiving, he continued, as if we were old friends catching up. That's good. She's been talking about how much she's missed you. I could almost see him, leaning back in some leather chair, spinning his story with the same silver tongue that once charmed me. Martin, what do you want? There was a pause, just long enough to confirm my suspicion. Then he sighed, slipping into the performance I knew too well. It's Rachel. She's in trouble. My heart clenched despite myself. What kind of trouble? She and we started a small real estate venture. Flipping houses, some commercial property. It was supposed to be solid. But the market's been rough, investors are pressuring us and, well, if we don't get cash fast, we could lose everything. And Rachel, she's terrified. It would break her. I gripped the phone tighter. So that was it. They hadn't invited me for reconciliation. They hadn't called me Mom because of love. They wanted money. How much are we talking? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. His tone brightened immediately. 200,000 would cover the immediate problems. But 3, maybe 400,000 would set things right. I know it's a lot, but with your success, I nearly laughed out loud. $400,000 spoken as casually as if he were asking me to lend him a cup of sugar. I let the silence stretch, just to watch him squirm. Finally, I said, interesting. Because just last week, I made some terrible investment decisions. I got caught up in the stock market, tech shares. You know how everyone said they were a sure thing? I lost almost everything. Barely enough left to keep the restaurants running. The silence on his end was deafening. I could hear the shift in his breathing, the pause as calculations began. Then, faintly, Rachel's voice in the background. Ask for more. Tell her it's urgent. So this was their game. A tag team. Martin cleared his throat. That's unfortunate, Laura, really, but maybe there's still something you can do. Rachel was hoping. I cut him off. If you thought I had nothing, would you have called at all? Would she? He faltered, just for a second, then tried to recover. Of course, you're her mother. We want you back in our lives. I closed my eyes, letting his lies roll over me. No, Martin. You want my money in your lives? That's not the same thing. Before he could respond, I hung up. My hand shook as I set the phone down, but not from weakness, from clarity. They had just failed the test. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the newspaper spread before me. My restaurant's quarterly earnings, my savings accounts, the tidy little nest egg I'd built. All of it was safe. I hadn't lost a dime, but they didn't know that. I thought of Rachel's voice, urgent in the background, pushing her father to ask for more. I thought of all the times I'd wished she'd pick up my call, the years I prayed she might write, and here she was, speaking through him only when she thought I could hand her a check. It should have broken me. Instead, it steeled me. I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at the stack of folders on my desk. Financial records, newspaper clippings, scraps of evidence I'd collected almost out of habit. For years, I'd thought of them as a way to keep myself busy, a way to understand the world I'd been excluded from. But now, I realized they were something else entirely. Weapons. If Rachel and Martin thought they could play me, they were about to learn I wasn't the woman they abandoned. The woman I used to be would have written the check, desperate for scraps of affection. But the woman I had become knew better. Thanksgiving was coming, and this year, the feast wouldn't be turkey and pie. It would be truth. The night after Martin's call, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold hours before dawn, staring at the yellow lamplight spreading across stacks of papers. For years, I had kept files, clippings from local newspapers, real estate transactions I happened across, even whispers I heard from old acquaintances. At first, it was just a way to keep track of Martin and Rachel without being in their lives, like peeking through a window I wasn't welcome to knock on. But now, those scraps of paper felt like ammunition. I started with Martin. A quick call to an old friend who still worked at the courthouse confirmed what I suspected. Foreclosures, liens, unpaid loans. Martin had spent the last decade juggling failing real estate ventures like a circus act, tossing one debt into the air while another came crashing down. Investors had been circling for years, waiting for him to trip. But it was Rachel's name that hurt most to see on those documents. She wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was listed on LLC paperwork, co-signing on loans, sitting on boards of shell companies that collapsed as quickly as they were formed. The more I read, the more I realized she had become his partner, not just in business, but in deception. Still, the worst discovery came 3 nights later. Through a local contact, I got a look at their latest project, a so-called nonprofit, the Rachel Brooks Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Children. The glossy website was full of staged photos, smiling children, inspirational quotes, donation links flashing in bright colors. Thousands of dollars had poured in from kind-hearted neighbors who believed they were giving kids a shot at education. But the scholarship didn't exist. Not a single cent went to schools. The money funneled straight into accounts with Martin's signature all over them. I sat back in my chair, bile rising in my throat. Pretending to care about children's futures just to bankroll their lifestyle? That was a level of cruelty I hadn't expected, even from Martin. It was one thing to hurt me. It was another to exploit the kindness of strangers. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called an old customer from my cafe days, a retired private investigator named Jim Collins, who used to sit at the counter every Thursday for meatloaf. "Laura Brooks," he said when he picked up, his voice rough like gravel. "Haven't heard from you in a long while." "I need your help, Jim," I said. "And this time, it isn't about fixing a leaky sink or checking if my car's about to break down. It's bigger. Much bigger." I explained everything. The fake scholarship, the real estate debts, the phone calls. He listened quietly, then gave a low whistle. "You've got yourself a mess of snakes there," he said. "But you're smart to call. People like that, you don't fight with your fists. You fight with paper." Within a week, Jim handed me a folder thick enough to snap a rubber band. Inside were bank statements, screenshots of Rachel's social media posts showing vacations and designer bags purchased the same week donations spiked. Testimony from a teacher who had been promised funds for her students but never received a dime. It was airtight, but I didn't stop there. I reached out to a journalist I trusted, Angela Harper, a local reporter who once covered the story of my restaurant expansion. Angela had a reputation for exposing frauds with surgical precision. I invited her to my kitchen, fed her pie, and laid the folder in front of her. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the evidence. "Laura, this isn't just a small-town scam. This is fraud, plain and simple. If we go public with this, it'll explode." "That's the idea," I said quietly. Angela leaned forward. "Why now? Why not go to the authorities right away?" I met her gaze. "Because timing matters. Thanksgiving dinner is next week. They invited me back into their lives for money. I want them to see, in real time, that it's over. No more lies. No more manipulation." For a moment, Angela just studied me. Then she nodded. "You're not the same woman you were, are you?" "No," I said, my voice steady. I'm stronger now, and I'm done being their victim. Over the next few days, I worked like I was preparing a feast. Only this wasn't food, it was justice. I coordinated with Angela, who promised a story ready to publish the moment I gave the word. Jim lined up contacts with lawyers who represented some of Martin's burned investors. Everything was falling into place like ingredients in a recipe I'd been perfecting for years. Every night, I rehearsed what I'd say at the table. I pictured Rachel's face when she realized I knew everything. I pictured Martin trying to charm his way out of it, only to be silenced by the weight of proof. But beneath all the planning, there was still a tremor in my chest. Because this wasn't just about exposing fraud. It was about looking my daughter in the eye for the first time in nearly 2 decades and seeing who she had become. Was there still a piece of the little girl who used to bake cookies with me on rainy afternoons? Or had she vanished completely, replaced by Martin's reflection? Thanksgiving would give me the answer. And I was ready to serve the truth cold, with no apologies. Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn morning that smelled of leaves and chimney smoke. I dressed carefully, nothing too formal, nothing too casual. A navy sweater, simple pearl earrings, boots that had carried me through long shifts in the kitchen. I wanted to look like myself, not the woman they expected me to be. The drive across town was quiet. The roads lined with families carrying pies. Cars parked crooked in driveways, kids chasing each other in backyards. I thought of all the Thanksgivings I had spent alone, eating reheated stuffing in front of the TV while pretending it didn't hurt. Today, that silence would end. Rachel's new house sat in a polished subdivision. Every home a mirror of the next. White siding, identical lawns, wreaths hung on identical doors. It looked expensive but hollow, the way staged homes in magazines do. When I rang the doorbell, the door flew open and Rachel appeared. "Mom!" she exclaimed, spreading her arms as if the last 18 years had been a blink. She hugged me quickly, too quickly, and stepped back, her eyes already scanning my face for signs of wealth. "You look prosperous," she said, her smile tight. Martin appeared behind her, his hair grayer, his stomach heavier, but his smirk unchanged. "Laura, glad you could make it. Come in." The living room smelled of turkey and candles, but beneath it all lingered something else. Desperation. I noticed the details immediately. Furniture that didn't quite match. A massive flat-screen TV. Designer handbags tossed carelessly on a chair. All the trappings of wealth without the foundation to hold them. 2 children peeked from behind the staircase. My grandchildren. My heart stuttered at the sight of them. Wide eyes, curious faces. I smiled softly, but Rachel ushered them back upstairs with a glance. "Later," she said quickly, as if the introduction could wait until after business was done. We sat at the dining table, a spread of food laid out like a stage set. Turkey carved perfectly, cranberry sauce gleaming, pies lined up like soldiers. Martin poured wine, Rachel filled plates, and I sat, watching. "So, Mom," Rachel began, her voice sweet but trembling at the edges. "We're just so happy you're here. It means the world to us to reconnect." "Family is everything," Martin added smoothly, lifting his glass. I nodded politely. "It certainly can be." They exchanged a glance, then Rachel leaned forward, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a secret. "Actually, Mom, there's something important we wanted to talk about. You know about our real estate venture. It's a huge opportunity, but we need investors to help us through a rough patch. And well, who better than family?" There it was. The pitch. I kept my face calm, though my stomach twisted. Martin jumped in. It's time sensitive. 200,000 would stabilize us, but with 4, we could secure everything. Think of it as an investment, Laura. A legacy for Rachel, for your grandchildren. I set down my fork, my hand steady. Interesting, because last week, Martin, you told me the same thing on the phone. And I told you then, I lost everything in the stock market. Surely you remember? Rachel blinked, her smile faltering. Well, maybe there's still a way. Even 50,000 would help. We could pay you back tenfold once the deal goes through. Before I could answer, a sharp knock rattled the door. Rachel frowned. Were we expecting anyone? Martin stood, irritation flickering across his face. He opened the door to find a man in a dark coat, holding an envelope. Martin Brooks? Yes? You've been served. The man handed over the papers and walked away without another word. Martin's face drained of color as he tore open the envelope. His hands shook as he flipped through page after page. This is a lawsuit. Multiple lawsuits. The investors, they've found me. Rachel's fork clattered onto her plate. What? That can't be right. Emergency asset freezes. Fraud charges, Martin muttered, his voice rising with panic. They want everything. The house, the accounts, everything. Rachel turned pale. How did they even know where we live? I sipped my wine calmly. Bad news has a way of finding its target. But the show wasn't over yet. Rachel's phone buzzed on the table. She grabbed it, her face lighting briefly with relief. Maybe it's a lawyer friend? She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as notification after notification flooded the screen. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Oh my God. Mom, what is this? People are saying I faked a scholarship fund. Fraud. Scam artist. There are hundreds of comments. Thousands. Martin leaned over her shoulder, his face twisting as he read. Anonymous source provides bank records proving Rachel Brooks never distributed scholarships despite collecting thousands in donations. His voice cracked. It's in the Lincoln Journal, the front page. Rachel's face turned white. No, this isn't real. It can't be. Is it true? Martin demanded, his voice harsh now, no longer protective. Rachel stammered. Of course not. I was going to start the fund, but we had other expenses. Their voices rose, colliding in panic, while I sat in silence, letting the chaos unfold. Finally, Rachel turned to me, her eyes wide, pleading. Mom, please. You said you had a surprise for us. You brought money, didn't you? You can help us fix this. Pay for lawyers, for PR, for whatever it takes to make this go away. Please. You can't just watch your own daughter fall apart. Her words might have broken me once. They might have made me reach for my checkbook, desperate for her love. But not anymore. I rose slowly, setting my napkin on the table. Rachel, Martin, I told you I had a surprise, and I delivered it. The lawsuits, the news, the truth, that's my gift to you. Their mouths fell open in unison, disbelief painted across their faces. I stepped toward the door, pulling on my coat with deliberate care. You wanted me back in your lives. Well, here I am. And now, so are the consequences. Mom, wait! Rachel cried, her voice breaking. You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. I was your mother every day you ignored me. Every birthday, every Christmas, every moment you chose silence. You didn't care then, and I don't care now. I opened the door, the cold November air rushing in. Behind me, I could hear Rachel sobbing, Martin cursing, the clatter of papers falling to the floor. But I didn't look back. I walked to my car, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My hands trembled, not from regret, but from release. For 18 years, I had carried the weight of their abandonment. Tonight, I left it on their dining room table, beside the turkey and untouched pie. The engine roared to life, and I drove away, their house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared altogether. Thanksgiving had never tasted so sweet. The days after Thanksgiving felt different, like a fog lifting after years of stumbling in the dark. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I wasn't waiting by the phone. I wasn't rehearsing imaginary conversations with Rachel, wondering if she might soften, if she might remember the mother who once sang her to sleep. This time, the silence wasn't a punishment. It was peace. Word spread quickly through town. Rachel and Martin's names appeared in the news, lawsuits piling up like leaves in a storm drain. Investors froze their accounts. Donors demanded refunds. The scholarship scam became a headline that people shared in disgust. Mother and daughter duo exploit community with fake charity. Neighbors who once admired their big house and new cars now shook their heads when they passed on the street. I heard whispers at the grocery store, updates from friends who clipped articles from the paper. Martin was drowning in legal trouble. Rachel facing public shame she couldn't talk her way out of. A few people asked if I felt guilty, if it was hard watching my own daughter unravel. I told them the truth. I had already watched her unravel 18 years ago, the night she walked away from me without a second glance. What happened now wasn't destruction. It was justice catching up. And for the first time, I felt light. I poured myself into something new. With my restaurants running smoothly under capable managers, I had time to give back. I started a weekly cooking class at the community center. Free lessons for anyone who wanted to learn how to make a decent meal on a budget. At first, it was just a handful of people. Single dads, college kids, a grandmother raising her grandchild. But soon, the room filled. Laughter bouncing off the walls as we rolled dough and shared stories. It wasn't about food, not really. It was about connection. It was about building something honest in a world where so many tried to fake their way through. One afternoon, as I handed out slices of cornbread, a young man told me, "You don't know how much this means. Nobody's ever taken the time to teach me anything like this." His gratitude filled a corner of my heart I thought had been permanently closed. I began traveling too. Small trips at first. Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, the wide skies of Montana. I drove with the windows down, music loud, the road stretching endlessly ahead. For years, I had been anchored by pain. Now, every mile felt like freedom. It was during one of those trips that Rachel called again. Her number flashed on my screen while I was parked at a scenic overlook. The Grand Canyon spread out before me like an open wound carved into the earth. I didn't answer. Later, I listened to her voicemail. "Mom, I know I messed up. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. But I need your help. Please, just call me back." Her voice cracked near the end, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine or just another performance. And honestly, I didn't need to know. I deleted the message. For so many years, I thought I was waiting for Rachel to come back, to say she loved me, to choose me again. But sitting there, looking out at the endless horizon, I realized I had been waiting for the wrong thing entirely. I wasn't waiting for her. I was waiting for myself, for the strength to let go. Back home, I found joy in the small routines I once resented. Walking to the farmer's market, tending to my little garden. Chatting with the mail carrier who always had stories to share. My house felt warmer, not because Rachel had returned, but because I no longer measured its worth against the silence of her absence. One evening, as I closed up my kitchen after a cooking class, Father Martinez from the local church stopped by. He smiled at me over the counter, his hands folded. "You seem lighter, Laura, like a burden's been lifted." He was right. The burden wasn't just Rachel and Martin. It was the belief that I wasn't enough without them. That belief had chained me to grief for 18 years. And now, finally, the chain had snapped. I still loved Rachel. I always would. But love didn't mean letting myself be used or forgiving a lifetime of silence with a single desperate phone call. Love could exist quietly, without expectation. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, I'd catch myself wondering if my grandchildren remembered the woman they glimpsed on Thanksgiving. If someday, when they're old enough to see the truth for themselves, they'll find me. But if they don't, I'll still be okay. Because I've built a life where I am not waiting anymore. As winter turned to spring, I stood in my backyard watching the first buds push through the soil. For the first time, I understood what freedom really felt like. It wasn't wealth or recognition or even justice. It was the ability to breathe without the weight of old wounds pressing down. I had survived abandonment, betrayal, and years of silence. I had rebuilt my life from ashes, and now, standing under a sky streaked with pink and gold, I finally felt whole. Thanksgiving had given me many things over the years: loneliness, longing, bitterness. But this one gave me the greatest gift of all: release.